Hello, community, and happy Thursday. As you know, this month is Women's History Month, and all month long, we have been celebrating some of the many Pacifica women who are leading in their community, in their professions, and also in their homes. Now, tonight is no different. To conclude this month's celebration, we have an incredible guest who has just returned to her home in San Francisco after being installed a Matai title in Samoa. Now, tonight, we will be talking about some pretty important topics like identity crisis, community scandal, hierarchy, politics, and much more. So stay tuned for that and more here on the Pacifica Voices podcast. Welcome, everyone. I am your host, Tautua Victoria, and thank you again for tuning into another episode of Pacifica Voices podcast. Now, if this is your first time tuning in, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel or like our Facebook page and follow us on Instagram to stay tuned on all things Anoa'i. Of course, if you want to join in on the action or volunteer, donate your time, please make sure you visit our website at www.anomatangi.org to sign up for our monthly newsletter. Now, before I continue on, and as I always do in the introduction, I do want to give a little introduction of who Anomatangi is, who we are, and what we do. So Anomatangi Polynesian Voices is a Silicon Valley-based organization committed to serving systems-impacted communities through heritage preservation and civic engagement. Now, if you are interested, again, in volunteering or donating your time or dollars to the movement, please do so at our website, anomatangi.org. Now, before we get into our interview tonight, there are a couple of announcements that I do need to make. Usually, we do go into our hot topics, current events, what is happening in the community, and then we bring that to you, to the table to talk about and why that is important, which we will continue on next week. But the announcements that I do want to make, one is around Ecumenical Hunger Program, which is a community gem of a program that is home to East Palo Alto, and they want to serve those in need. If you are in need of food, or if you are in need of furniture, all the way down to pots, pans, clothes, beds, they are the place for you to get those items. And so what we'll do is we will put that in our newsletter, which will be going out tomorrow. So if you are in need, please make sure you subscribe to get that information. Our last announcement is Bloomhouse is having an event on April 18th. And we have that flyer. Unfortunately, I did not upload it onto our setup here. So if you do want to learn more about that event, which is coming up, I believe it is a mural reveal at the Bloomhouse Emerson Collective office in East Palo Alto. Please make sure you stay subscribed to our newsletter for that flyer. Now, without further ado, I know this is a conversation that I have been looking forward to long before we reached out to her team to get her on the podcast. And especially now, after having received such a duty of responsibility, it is my honor to introduce our next guest. A native of San Francisco, our guest is a celebrated Samoan activist, revolutionary leader, and visionary whose representation as a courageous advocate and public elected official has opened doors not just for her PI people, but for many marginalized, voiceless communities. Now, our guest has served on many commissions, many boards, many state coalition spaces, and I probably will not cover them all if I were to name them one by one, but her resume is so impressive. And within the last year, we'll focus on within the last year, she has been recognized by the state of California as a civil rights leader, and as well as being inducted into the San Mateo County's Hall of Fame. Now, at the top of her resume and her lifetime achievements, which she will be talking about extensively tonight, our guest has been recently installed as a chief. So please join me in welcoming, I'm going to cry, Papali'i Manufou Liaiga Anoa'i.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to join the conversation. I continue to be a big fan of Anamatangi's work, who has been in the community um, in over 25 years, and that is to be applauded. So to be invited in this space this evening is definitely heartfelt. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Manufo, for joining us in this space. This is literally all we could talk about at the office. And so tonight is just one of those bucket list moments. And, you know, I'll be quite frank here. As I was prepping for our conversation, I was going through some of your resume, and that resume is literally longer than my arm, with the achievements that you've been able to achieve, and the callings that you've been able to not only respond to so beautifully, but also execute. I think is just beautiful, and that's absolutely something that we're going to talk about extensively, as mentioned in the intro. But I did want to just start out by asking you, do you still get nervous?
I'm nervous right now. I'm always nervous. Never know who the audience is, but I just always come in with a level of heaviness anytime I'm asked and tasked to speak on anything, because I'm very conscious of my representation, and I don't take for granted who I represent and who my brown skin
Mm.
represents, because many times this is the only instance that people that do not look like us may have of all of our community. So I never take it lightly when I enter into spaces.
Wow, incredible. Now, I do want to start at the beginning, or at least of what we know so far, as a public figure, because you are considered a public figure. You went to Lowell High School, and you went there during a time, I'm sure, right after the civil rights movement. We also had women's suffrage going on during that time, and you succeeded and you excelled in such beautiful ways. Where did that come from? I mean, did you grow up with it, or was this something that you just had to learn, kind of the confidence at an early age? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, thank you. I think I've been very fortunate to live in a sense of duality with my parents. My father comes from American Samoa, which is an American territory. My mother comes from independent Samoa. So my father was all about assimilation. It was very important to him that his children were educated and spoke English well. But my mother was anchored in culture and didn't let us speak English in the home. And she was also a high chief. So my reality is that I understood the importance of education in and outside of the classroom. I knew how important it was to be street smart. Growing up in the Excelsior district in San Francisco, I knew that I needed all of that to be equipped to enter in these spaces. My mom, in particular, my father was the silent supporter, but my mom was really big on being at the forefront of things, and she understood that I needed to legitimize my presence in being the classroom president, in being the student government president. So for me, I was running for classroom, whatever it was. My mom made sure, you better go and run for that. You better ask about it. And so that was what I grew up in, and understanding leadership and having an up close picture of that. In order for me to really succeed, not just academically, I needed to build a level of leadership. And so that continued literally from elementary all the way into middle school. I always sat in student government, was serving as a vice president or president. I didn't run for office right away when I got to Lowell. Because for people who may not know Lowell High School, one, it was very difficult to get into. Two, I was adjusting. There was no one that looked like me there that I was close to. I luckily had a cousin that was graduating out, but I was also glad to see that I met a Hawaiian girl and also another Samoan that was there, and we were all classmates. I won't say the year because I'll be dating myself. You can see my grade, but the reality is that I struggled as a student because I couldn't find myself in a space that didn't support students that looked like me, or also came from the part of the city of San Francisco that I came from. But as I learned to find my way and navigate at Lowell, I once again found myself in that space of leadership and became the first Samoan Pacific Islander, in my understanding to date, the only serving president at Lowell High School, which to me, was disappointing. But what it did for me was validated that it wasn't just about me being tokenized because I was one of few, but it validated my skills, and all that I had brought with me to be able to sit in a seat of leadership as I graduated out of what they say is to be one of the most prestigious public high schools in the country.
Wow, incredible. Now, can you walk me, because I assume that having experienced something like that in a 4-year American education system, and then going straight into, or did you go straight into American Samoa Community College?
I didn't. I actually became a non-traditional student, and that's a very vulnerable space for me. My father died in my junior year of high school, and we don't talk about it a lot, about how mental health impacts us. But I fell into this black hole. I was accepted to NYU, New York University. I was also accepted into UC Berkeley. And these are
Wow.
all things that my parents dreamed for me to do and spaces that they expected me to occupy. But I fell into this black hole where I just couldn't find myself. I was literally um, begging for some form of oxygen, and my mother became a single mother and wasn't sure how to deal with it. So I struggled in finding myself in school again. So I took a break. I took a break from school. And then I eventually started a family of my own as I tried to get back into school while I was still residing here. But as I started a family, my husband and I picked ourselves up and made American Samoa our home. And when I got to American Samoa, I was like, I want to go back to school. And so American Samoa Community College became a pathway for me to once again immerse myself in learning. And there I thrived. I once again became student government president. I showed up as a San Franciscan, as a Bay Area person. And it was difficult for people to comprehend my leadership because it was not as Samoan, and coming into this very cultured space. So, that's how I ended up landing in American Samoa. And I'm so glad I found myself again there.
Can you speak to the challenges perhaps of you going to American Samoa College, which is in the Pacific, and perhaps was there a culture shock for you, or did it perhaps emphasize any sort of identity crisis that you may have not been aware of while living in San Francisco?
Yeah, I will tell you, while I visited both Samoas throughout my childhood, my father worked for Pan American. My mother was already a chief in the 70s. So we were there frequently, but those were like spurts of visits. Like I'd go in and out. I was now a resident. I didn't speak Samoan like I was a local. So I was already outed. They're like, she speaks of a Spanglish version of Samoan, so right there I was already identified as an outsider. But I think the biggest thing is that I was seeking acceptance, because while I grew up in the culture, it was also still an American version of the Samoan culture. And so that was an awakening for me in understanding that I understood the inner workings of how our traditions and the Samoa worked, and I saw it. But that's not part of your daily living. I was now immersed in being around the language that I wasn't speaking all the time with people outside of my home. So that caused a huge barrier for me to be accepted into this new group of folks. And I think that was the biggest challenge for me. But what I started to realize is that people started to recognize who Fo was as a person and gravitated to that. and wanted to learn about me as much as I wanted to learn about them. And that's how I kind of found my way in navigating through not just the college, but in American Samoa. And I will say that music was also my lifeline in throughout school. And I think that's how I've been fortunate to make friends. So when I hit the music scene in American Samoa, I was able to perform, at like the South Pacific pageant or the Miss American Samoa pageant. And being an island, those were the big events that kind of catapulted me into being in different arenas, and kind of provided me some soft landing to really gain some footing. And it helped me. It helped me. And I just had a really great group of folks who rallied around me. And I will say that provided me so much support to really understand how to navigate at school and also on the ground. And my local families did that for me as well.
Wow, incredible. If you're just joining us right now, we have with us tonight Papali'i, Manufou, Liaiga, Anoa'i. And please make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well as Facebook and our social media platforms. So as you are continuing to navigate us through your story, what was the transition back into American society after graduating from American Samoa College and then going to San Francisco University? What was that like?
Yeah, it was challenging to re-enter, as you say, American society, is because my mother actually uprooted herself to move to American Samoa to be close to me. And yet she stayed there for a little bit. And I said, I'm actually going back, Mom. So I came back to not having, those foundational pieces of a home, because she had actually sold the home that I grew up in. So I came back and we had to transition into finding housing just like any other student, but I was coming with a family, finding a level of stability. Was it a challenge? And also looking at being a student? Absolutely. It was. But then I go back to that level of culture and family where we had family open up their doors and help us to just, get our bearings. And so that helped us a lot. But coming in with the family, I struggled to remain as a student for a little bit and ended up picking up a job. So I came in initially as a student at San Francisco State University. But when I landed a job at the mayor's office and became the first Pacific Islander liaison under city and county of San Francisco, Mayor Brown afforded me an opportunity to come on board. And then I got into USF. Again, being a non-traditional student, I got to go to school in the evening and complete my degree. And because I was here on a government scholarship from American Samoa. So for me, this way of coming into being a student was difficult for me. And I imagine it was the same hardship sometimes our students that come from abroad face when they don't have a solid foundation to come to in America as students from, our oceanic countries like Tonga, American Samoa, independent Samoa. It is a huge transition.
Yeah. And your transition came during the time of a radical push for ethnic studies in the classroom, specific ethnic studies, Latinx studies, Asian American studies. What was that like for you to kind of be a part of that movement while also having your experience back at home in Samoa? Was there ever a disconnect, or did it serve a bigger purpose in you really grounding yourself in your identity?
Yeah, it definitely served a bigger purpose. I mean, I was fortunate in our church and our Samoan churches, when many of our Samoans arrived here, served as our villages. So I grew up in a program where we called Aonga Samoa. So it's Samoan school. And so, our reverend, our pastor and his wife implemented that program. And that is where I got the foundation for Camp Unity, which we founded in 2011. It is another version of Aonga Samoa. So we were immersed in all things Samoan, in language, in our faith, because we also learned from the Bible, which was a huge part of my language curve. So that was a big part of my purpose and understanding that when I came back and saw this form of ethnic studies, again, it did not include Pacific Islanders. It included everything under the sun but Pacific Islanders, because we continue to be under the categorization and the umbrella of AAPI. So there was an emphasis on our Asian study programs, and a lot of time, our educators felt that that was enough. And it took for us to step up to the plate, there was just a handful of us that tried to advocate for Pacific Islander studies, which started to find its way into San Francisco State, where San Francisco State continues to be at the forefront of Pacifica studies. And this is outside of Hawaii, because many of us know that University of Hawaii is the cradle for Pacific Islander studies, but San Francisco State University here in the Bay Area has been and continues to be at the forefront in ensuring that Pacifica studies, oceanic studies continues to be very authentic and meets the needs of our students. And that's the space, that's the purpose that I have found myself in.
Yeah. And I do want to get back to that, because I know this morning we talked at length around the idea of accredited heritage versus inherited heritage. And you have such a unique perspective on that matter, but more on that later. So you have now graduated. You are a college graduate. You have a family. What pushed you into, civic engagement and further on public office?
Yes, I think civic engagement is an innate quality for any Pacific Islander. I think we're always in servitude. It's just that we don't look at it from a formal perspective. For me, I've applied all of the service that I understand myself being in. I easily apply it to being an elected official and being a public servant, because I understand that the title that I've given and have earned by the votes of those who have voted for me allows me to facilitate very, very important conversations and decision making. And I understand that process because it's very similar to our culture and how it's also embedded in our village, structure, our infrastructure of the Matai system, and that level of hierarchy. I don't see a big difference in that. So I have found myself to be very fluid in those spaces. But I think what I have found to be missing is the level of respect and fa'aloalo that we come from, which floors many of my colleagues when I show up in that space. And I show up as a Samoan, and I come in with this level of fa'aloalo where I don't need the title to serve, but I appreciate being at the table, and I will always show a level of respect and humility, but I will always be assertive and ensure that, the voices that I represent are heard. So for me, I think that I haven't felt challenged in that way, but I think that it's been a learning process and a two-way street for myself and colleagues that I've been able to interact with.
Yeah. Yeah. So you getting into public service and then kind of associated with that, the public light, would you say, I mean, kind of, we know we say hindsight is 2020. Your first, I guess, run, campaign, and success into public office, what was the community response to that? Being the first Pacific Islander, the first Samoan, the first woman of Pacific Islander descent to do many things. Now you're in the public light. Was that received well in community or not?
Yeah, I will say that I've received a varied response, but mostly positive. I think what I have found to be very defining is that not just our community, but many folks don't understand the work that I do. They're like, well, what are you? They don't see school board trustees as a public elected. Many times they only recognize someone that sits on a city council or, as a state senator or, congressperson, on the federal level. But the thing is that I think I have had an opportunity to run a campaign, and it's like you mentioned, a successful campaign that really brought awareness to the role that I sit in and have sat in for the past 8 years. So I will say that what has been received really well is the win and the feel good campaign that a lot of people have been able to see on the ground and on social media. I think the missing component is just the level of understanding of the challenges that I face being in this seat, and how it's very lonely and isolated, that many people don't recognize that I have always appreciated the support that I've gotten at the ballot box through the fundraising that I've been able to do. But I think the missing component and the disconnect for our people is not always understanding that the work continues, and that the continuity of support is also still needed, not just that one hit wonder during the campaign and then, oh, she's in, she's there, that's fine, she doesn't need us anymore. But the reality is that I do, because many times I'm sitting, at the dais with my colleagues trying to make a decision that many times people may not understand or misunderstand, that it compromises what their perspective of me is as a leader. But the reality is that I have I have had many challenges, I believe, that have led me to be able to sit in this seat, represent our people. But I've been very grateful, and that gratitude comes from the level of support that I have been able to receive.
Yeah. You know, kind of looking at your resume again, you have been in this game. Hi, Ocean. Can you go outside, please? Sorry about that.
Say bye to them.
Say bye. You have been in this game for two generations plus some change. I mean, you are now where, I mean, I'm sure there have been waves of leaders that have come while you have been serving. And my question, and I really want to point towards this next discussion, is really around the different types of leaders that we're seeing emerging into community spaces, perhaps outside of the class, from outside of the classroom, oftentimes outside of the college classroom. What are you? What have you been experiencing? What are some of the characteristics that you would say are found in a lot of the younger leaders? And I do want to preface this with a quote that I've been working on. Well, I wrote this book called Hyphen American. I don't know if you've heard of it, but this hyphen American identity. And what I write in another book that I'm working on is that the hyphen American identity experience drifts between competing ideals and opinions, such as inheritance and merit, social duty, and individual autonomy. Therefore, this work requires a degree of grace, courage, and correction. And I want to emphasize on the correction because, as someone who their first interaction with culture was not of the community, was not in Tongan society, but was in the classroom, there is a certain amount of correction that I've had to go through. I can't say that that's the same for many of the emerging leaders who are coming into community work. What are your thoughts on the phrase that I just shared with you?
Yeah, no, thank you. I love the opportunity to be able to look at this level of, inherited wisdom of our heritage, and also speaking to the level of accredited learning. I think that there has to be a balance between that. But I do see that, there has been tension, and I speak from a generational perspective. I realize that there aren't too many people my age, from my generation, that are still kind of in this work, and also making sure that while we move forward and progress, that there's still opportunities to revisit and ensure that our younger generation, our emerging leaders, especially those who have come through academia more recently. When I grew up in this work, coming up in this work, we didn't see a lot of our people going through a formal education process, advancing themselves past high school. And it was because during that era was like, get to work, put food on the table, community's great. That's an extension if you have the opportunity. But what I have seen now is that a lot of the learnings have come from the classroom. I love that we see an expansion of, oceanic literature. That's been a huge defining element that has allowed for a lot of learning for our new students that have come into understanding what it means to be Pacifica, what it means to be Samoan, what it means to be Tongan. But sometimes what we're missing is the history and a lot of the labor and the footwork and the laying of the infrastructure of many leaders who have come before us here in America. Here in
Yes.
America. And I want to speak very specifically to that because in the San Francisco Bay Area, there have been so many foundational leaders who have
Mhm.
laid the groundwork. So when we speak to the creation and establishment of the Pacific Islander Cultural District in San Francisco, when we speak to how we now see ethnic studies has now elevated our Pacific Islander curriculum in the classrooms because Pacific Islander professors got together to ensure that that curriculum was representative of our people. You know, those elements require a level of balance from the
Mm.
generational history that have been carried from leaders before us that formed organizations of advocacy like Samoa, you know, where Luma Tuiasosopo stepped up to Governor Jerry Brown. I was on the bus with those women and my mother in tow at 9 years old, seeing this woman who could barely speak English to ensure that Samoan was an ethnicity on our government forms, and particularly went and advocated to then President Jimmy Carter in Washington, D.C., in a Puletasi, could barely speak English. But when you see Samoan on a form, there is so much power in history that came into ensuring that that was on a document that you fill out today. We cannot dismiss that history. We cannot come in and say, I am educated. I've learned so much in these past 4, 6 years. I celebrate that. But what I want to encourage our new emerging leaders is that don't forget the history and the trailblazers that laid those stepping stones for you to be able to be accepted at a whole nother level. So many people came before me, before us, that ensured that I stepped into being all of these people say the first. I sit with
Mm.
heaviness about people saying, "Oh, Fo, you've been the first, the first, the first." I take that with a grain of salt and understanding I have not been the first because our ancestors that came here in the 50s, they were the first. They just are unsung heroes who have never been acknowledged for the groundwork that they laid for you and I.
Yeah, our hidden figures, absolutely right. And I did want to just kind of nail this down further so that our listeners that are either listening or tuning in on YouTube or Facebook, this morning we did talk about this topic of accredited heritage and uh, inherited heritage. And you brought up such a good point that we have to defend both, that it can't be an either or, but it has to live within the realm of both being celebrated, both being defended, and really understanding that without one, there is no other. And you said something so beautiful about the understanding heritage as a villager and understanding heritage as something that you're learning from a textbook and being very obvious, it being very apparent which of which people fall into if we're speaking of categories. Can you share a little bit more about that? Because I think that that is a very important part of this conversation is that sometimes the versions that we're learning in the textbook, which we know are not always the right versions, or not always the complete or accurate reflections of our people. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I think that there definitely needs to be a level of humility and willingness. The willingness has to be there for us to be open-minded to understand that the things that we've learned in the classroom, in the books that we've been given are a very new form of learning for us. Our history is oral. For hundreds and thousands of years, we've been receiving history in the form of storytelling. And many times that history is pretty accurate, is pretty darn accurate from family to family. You know, the power of the tongue in our culture has continued to extend itself for hundreds of years. Those do not live on the pages of a textbook. Our ancestors have not had the opportunity to ink the pages that professors that look like us today are using as a formal curriculum. And the reality is that many times we can't even bring it into those spaces because, that literature has to be vetted first. But the reality is they have an opportunity to use the forum and the platform that they're given to use the oral history that comes by way of our ancestors, our elders, and chiefs like me that are holders of that information. And the balance comes from a level of willingness to understand the accreditation of your wisdom through you achieving your formal education and your PhD, your graduate degree, all of the education. The culmination of that is celebrated with great pride by all of us. But the reality is that it's incomplete. We need to be open and willing to understand that there's a whole bunch of history that is held in the community that needs to be unearthed. And that's where the willingness comes from. So many are holders of that information. The balance comes in when we are really being very intentional of ensuring that those unsung heroes, those unheard stories are brought into these learning spaces. But I share that again, where the accredited versus inherited, we need to understand that we are caretakers of our history. So we need to be good shepherds of how we ensure that the learning lives past the storytelling that many times do not reach our students.
Right, that's so good, and I think that is a perfect transition into this idea and really the structure of hierarchy. You mentioned in your introduction and also this morning of the similarities of hierarchies and in Samoa and then also here in the States, and how well, I'll let you share about that a little bit more, but hierarchy. I mean, where should we stand on the matter if we are trying to understand ourselves better as Pacific Islanders, while also living in a very, very critical society that perhaps does not think the same about hierarchy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, thank you. I will use the Fa Samoa and my perspective as a Samoan woman when people talk about the culture and whether it is intact, if it's still thriving here in America, what are the commonalities to it continuing in, our homeland country. And so what I take great pride in is returning recently from both Samoas and looking at how we continue to practice and demonstrate our culture, our Samoa here in California and pretty much throughout the nation is very much intact. The commonalities of how we understand the core of participating in the Samoa. I think what has been challenging and sometimes many times misunderstood, and is why people have stepped away from that level of being cultured or being, Samoan, is just misunderstanding the protocols and really the fact that you are the owner of how you participate in the Samoa. I think what has become blurred is the misunderstanding of expectations that are put on by an individual. But that is not the cultural component or the reason why Samoa has lived and thrived for generations. The purpose of the Samoa is to give alofa, to provide support in times of need. We see it during weddings, we see it during funerals, we see it when people are looking for a safe space of refuge. That is the Samoa. And to go to Samoa and American Samoa this past month and to see it continue to be demonstrated in its fullest form and see that we mimic and replicate it in so many ways and that it's intact here in American society where we live, oceans away, gives me great pride and warms my heart, especially as I step into this role, taking over my mother's High Chief title out of her village. It's very meaningful to understand that we are still doing things right.
Yes, that's so good. And to all that are listening, we promise to get to the most incredible experience that you just experienced a week ago. But I do want to continue on this topic of kind of the culture and its preservation outside of our islands and coming into the diaspora. And you bring up a really good point that the decision making is not to change the culture, but to participate. Whether or not you want to participate, that is the decision that you get to make as a member, whether it be of descent or if you are married into the culture, but to take it and change it or adapt it to the times or perhaps even to the socialization that you are living in is not right. And I think I say this earlier to the point around course correction, that when we see these things, how do we respond to that? Like, what is the most appropriate way to call that out, and also, while still keeping, respect and also everything, but doing it in a way where it's not in a couple of generations we are celebrating and practicing something very, very different from what is being practiced back at home.
Yeah. Yeah, I will share the example of my family coming together this past month, and is that every family is structured differently. For mine, we our clan has 12 farkamas. So outside of this umbrella of Malietoa Ngatuita Sina descendants, under that umbrella, there's 12 clans, and each clan has a leader, has their
Hmm.
spokesperson, has the person that is sitting in the seat to navigate how things are structured and the giving is structured. And the biggest piece, again, as I go back to, is understanding your role, not just as a chief, under that hierarchy, but also as a villager and a family member. It goes back to how you choose to participate in this process, in the protocol and the Samoa. People get overwhelmed with, you see now is that, oh, you've got to give $1,000 and 100 mats. Yeah, that may have been the expectation that may be set by individual leaders. But the reality is you have ownership, free
Hmm.
agency to say, this is my family. I don't have all that, but I'm going to be present. That's why in Samoan we say, "Eka workingo." Your presence is so important. You may not be able to give all of those physical things, materialistic things, to participate in this structure that's been demonstrated to you in different ways. But the reality is, you can still participate in the Samoa in so many other ways. I think we forget that we have a role to contribute our talents. Like, you can help with cooking, you can help with the fe'aus. There's so many ways you can participate in giving back to your clan. And at the end of the day, you are able to contribute to that part of the Fasamoa through that event. What, like I said, whether it is the wedding or it's a funeral. But the thing is that I think people miss is that you have ownership of that. And I say that over and over again because people end up stepping away from it and saying, I just don't want to do the Fasamoa. I don't want to participate in that way. I don't believe in that way. But they have then put the burden of walking away from a part of culture that is embedded in their DNA, in their very being. Being Samoan in that way and giving alofa is who we are.
Yes, that's so good, and we could talk extensively on that. But I wanted to ask now, how does that, the essence of showing up and giving as a form of love, how does that translate into politics, where the dichotomy is Democrat versus Republican? To have that type of thought is might be anti-party, or might just burn down the entire two-party system that we have here in the States. How do you navigate that as a Samoan woman? This is who you are, and then coming to a space where, nope, actually, we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to actually be separate on the aisle. What has been your experience on that?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think I know who I am. It took me years to understand that I can show up and take on the challenges that I face as a decision maker. I believe that the separate parties are not Pacifica, are not Samoan for me. I'm a registered Democrat. And sometimes people find me making a very conservative, decision. But I think the the thing is people ask, do you find yourself compromised when you're sitting up there with your colleagues? And at the end of the day, we have to vote on these action items as policymakers in our district. And for me, what I've done many times over is to be transparent. Sometimes I can't make the decision that I want to make, but I have to make the decision, my best decision that I'm tasked to make with the information and the tools that I've been equipped with at that time. And what has been in my favor and where I've seen grace is that I am always transparent with the public, because every meeting that we have is televised, and I'm always honest with the details, because that's the part that we bring to the table. That's who I am. That is how I show up. I hold myself accountable. I am transparent because I believe that that's the leader that I want serving me. And so when I'm making a decision, I've had Democratic partners say that, that's not aligned with the party, you're kind of, but I don't find it difficult to reach across the aisle. I think that's very Samoan, very Samoan. And, our faith is a huge part of our culture. I don't see them as separate. My faith, all of the decisions I make are guided as a woman of God, so I see myself always making the decision of doing what is right first. I don't look at myself as that being loyal to being a Democrat or loyal to being, aligned with my Republican colleagues. At the end of the day, I think we're tasked to do what is right and to lift our people up, especially our marginalized communities who have no representation. And that's who I believe I serve.
Yeah, that's so good. And before moving on to the next question, I brought up with you this morning how a couple of years ago I had the privilege of sharing space with then Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, and how she shared very similar to you that before her first day in office in Washington, D.C., she had told her mom that she had to bring something to share with her fellow new colleagues on the Hill in Washington, D.C. And when she did that, she went around and was just, regardless of what party they were aligned with, just giving, and very, very similar. And I love that, because that definitely is rooted in the Samoan identity, the Pasifika way of doing things, despite the structures and the systems that you might be plugging into. I love that so much. So could you, now I think is an appropriate time to give and honor space to talk about what you just went through this past week, and as transparent as you would like to be, I'm sure that you are still reeling from this experience. But you are a chief now. I am speaking to a chief. What do you feel when I say that? What's coming up for you?
Yeah, it's been strange to be called Papali'i, where people have really honored the name in so many ways, in showing me so much love and respect. Not that that's not how I was received in spaces before, but I received that honor, and I'm emotional because I think of my mom. As a woman, as we celebrate Women's History Month, a lot of times we forget that, our women make so many sacrifices, so many sacrifices. And we, the Samoan word for a pastor's wife or a chief's wife is faletua. The literal translation is back house of faletua. And we are tasked and known to be advisors to our husbands, to our brothers who sit in these leadership roles of entitlement as chiefs. But my mom was just formidable. She was a visionary, and she also knew her worth. And that was the legacy that she lived. And I got to witness that up front. And so before my mother's passing, she had many times over said, you've done so many great things. I'm so proud of you. And I'm her namesake. Manufou is my mother's name. And so Manufou means new beginning, and is a shorter version of Semanu Letayao Fo, a new morning. And so she didn't take her representation lightly. And she knew that when she was supported by her siblings to become a female chief, that she would face challenges, because it is still not accepted in many villages and families to have female chiefs. And even though some become title holders, you still are unable to speak,
Mm,
and that's still like a whole nother level of challenges that we face. But for me, my family had honored me and my mom's, history, history as a force in her family, by showing me so much love. So last July, my older siblings made the decision to ensure that I take on this role. My brother has been serving as a title holder, carrying the Papali'i title for many years. In fact, for over 30 years, and he is actually the second elder of all of the chiefs at this time. But he and my older sister, are unfortunately facing some, severe health issues, and they are no longer able to travel. So they did something out of the ordinary. They made a request to our High Chief, who oversees the village, and brought him over from New Zealand. And so this is bringing the formalities out of the homeland, and
mm,
I just want to name that it has happened before, but social media allowed for the world to see this event last July. And so when we had this happen, EPV covered it, and we were very grateful for them being able to do so. But we got some backlash. People, people, there was some backlash of why this formal process, this ceremonial process in my mom's family was happening outside of the village. But what people fail to understand is that it was a gift of love. My
mm.
brother and my sister unfortunately are facing cancer and issues that are preventing them from being in the village. But this was an act of love. They wanted the village to know that when I show up, that I had their full support. And that was an act of love. And so when I showed up in the village and we had the ceremony on March 11th, prior to that, we were putting our things together. So you have to understand, when you enter into the Falekali Malo, our guest house, there's a protocol. It's structured. You sit,
Mm.
you need to know where you sit, so you've got to go in and understand that there is a hierarchy that exists. So when we did the Ava ceremony, all of the existing chiefs and also the elders received the Ava. I received the Ava. That's not customary. But that's because my mom, all of her hard work in her family for over 60 plus years, the love that she had, showed for generations, was returned to her daughter. And I was able to receive the Ava. And I accepted that with much gratitude. The next day, when we actually had the installation, the Falekali Malo was filled with women. There were 98 of us. 75% were women Matais, who were now tasked with the titles to take them back home to their villages. Some of us came from the Bay, others were returning to Australia, to New Zealand, Lebanon, I was told, back to American Samoa. These females stepped up as warriors to ensure that they could represent not just their nuclear family, but our family globally. And I was so proud to be able to sit alongside and accept my title with these pretty incredible women who are my family. So there were 98 of us that were given titles on March 11th. And I'm still reeling, like you said. I'm still reeling from the experience, and it's been amazing. So when I got to American Samoa, this interview, just like my arrival there, people were hungry to learn about what I do, to learn about my experience, and I didn't get a break. I actually walked into a keynote address. I walked into different meetings that I'm just excited to be able to see the fruits of those conversations come to life real soon.
Wow, that is so good. I wanted to add to that, that when people think about, what is responsibility? How do I know that I am carrying out a responsibility? And I think it relates to this. Someone had answered that and said, it's the things that you are sacrificing for. That is how you know it is responsibility in your life. And I mean, I'm going to cry with you about your mother. I mean, what a woman to sacrifice for the lineage, and more importantly, of course, you and being able to take on the mantle. I mean, there is a certain weight and responsibility of that on you. How do you carry that, or how do you plan to carry that responsibility now that you are an installed chief?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's very important to me is to share the legacy. I saw my mother do that. She wanted to be sure that she wasn't a gatekeeper. Many times we see our Matais live very long lives, and many times don't look at the emerging, leaders that are wanting to step into these roles. And so we need to shepherd that passion. We need to
Mm,
provide them with the opportunity while we're still here, not when we're deciding that it's my time to leave, and then give them opportunity. That mentorship is so key. So
mm,
I will say that is one of the biggest things I envision as a chief to ensure happens, that we continue to keep the door open for our younger leaders who are choosing to step into this role, because it's a huge decision. It's a conversation, just like running for office, that you need to have with your immediate family, because it will require many sacrifices. When something happens, you've got to get on a plane and you need to physically be there if you can. Or, there is the participating part of giving alofa through a monetary donation. Outside of prayer, I think it's really important that we allow people to understand that the Samoa and the infrastructure of the Matai system was meant for us to have opportunities to lead and opportunities to support each other, in those moments of time. But the reality is that we need to continue to build leaders. But that can't happen if there's not a level of willingness from the leaders that are sitting in the seats. So I see that as being a primary role for me, but also breaking down these misconceptions of what the Fat Samoa is. I see a lot of times, here in America too, up in stateside, people have decided to define it on a different level, that they look at it more as a burden instead of
mm.
looking at it as a blessing. So I see myself also being a vehicle of helping to unlearn some of those things about the Fat Samoa. I see that as my role of raising that level of awareness to generations who are unfortunately misunderstanding the purpose and the meaningful practices of our culture.
Right, which is so needed. We talk about, you mentioned earlier, taking the formalities outside of what is normally how the ceremony functions or operates. And similar to that, now that you are a Matai in America, um, can you explain a little bit about how that works? Being a Matai, holding those titles, but doing so outside within the diaspora.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think a lot of times people don't know how that works. So this is a great opportunity. There are things that happen here and things that happen in the homeland. Most families structure it as such. Things that happen in Samoa when it's on a village perspective, more on the ground where it isn't a sitting chief. A lot of times those things are taken care of by our local chiefs. When something happens here, throughout America, or if you're in Australia or New Zealand, we're representing our family at large here in this space. So when we show up, we're not showing up. I don't show up as just me. I show up as a high chief from my extended family. So whatever I give and organize with my fellow Papali'i family, we show up as a whole, and we represent our homeland, our village, through us organizing and giving, and our presence is felt in that way. And we make it very clear on how we show up and give our gift of aloha through the Fa'asamoa culture. So I think that it's important for people to understand that there are times when we're called to return to the village, just like this protocol that I sat in of us installation of our new chiefs. That requires that many of us travel home to not just support, the chiefs that are taking on a title, but also to be there to be part of the village process and support this new generation of leaders. So all of the fasamoa that happens outside of the village, the expectation is chiefs such as myself will handle all of the formalities. And that's what we are tasked for. So tasked with, I've done that many years, over 20 plus years before taking on that title. So for me, it's the title. I accept it. It allows me to navigate at a different level, to be very honest. But I
Yeah.
take great pride in knowing that I've been doing that already for my family. I stepped into my mother's role when she moved abroad, and I've been doing that. So I think it's important for people to understand that our chiefs are here to be the leader, to formally articulate the Fasamoa, but also to formally help us convene and to ensure that we're doing the Fasamoa correctly.
Right. That's so good. And looking to you as well as other chiefs that are both in America and then also in Samoa, to uphold that, and to uphold those traditions. I did want to ask though, as someone who is now a chief, being added to the resume of other distinguished titles, where the decision making power that you have as a chief is very similar to the decision making power that you have, if not the same, that you have as a board trustee, as a commissioner. Is there any like hierarchy within that? I'm just asking out of curiosity. Like, how do you prioritize, or how do you even show up and say, you know what, I think this is appropriate for me to be, and kind of allow my chief. I don't know how that works, but is there a priority, like, in the many titles now that you carry?
Yeah, I will say in the Samoan circle that I if I'm not a chief, I mean the reality is I don't get a say. I
Mm,
don't get a say. So there are circles in our Samoan community that I would have to put on my advocate hat and really overstep some of the cultural norms. But in understanding the importance and the respect I have for our Samoa, I understand that having my chief title, again, we know in general, just like being a public elected, sitting on the dais, that titles help us to navigate through these spaces of hierarchy, because that is how
mm,
society has created the structures and systems that we are a part of. The decision making happens at a higher level, and it requires that you come in with a title that is recognized. So that's very similar to our Matai system. It is very similar to government and the space I sit in as a public elected official. And that's real. I sit in as a board trustee. The general public cannot sit in and be a policymaker. So I earned the seat to be there, just like I believe I've earned my mom's title in many ways through my service and my tautua to my community and my family. And my mom validated the path for me through her good works. And so the
yeah,
commonalities in those spaces are very similar, that the title allows us to be in the space, but the wisdom that we bring in, and to me, my Samoanness has benefited me in so many ways. My colleagues continue in work on the dais are floored that I understand the balance of showing up with respect, stepping back when I need to, and making sure that I put out fires, but still being
yeah,
assertive with a level of humility. To me, that is pacifica. People do
mm,
not understand that. They don't understand that part of our culture, that we
yeah,
will always show up with love, grace, and forgiveness. And that's how I lead.
yeah, yeah. That's so good. And thinking about the many hats that you wear. And included in that is, of course, you are a wife, you are a mom, and your husband is also a chief. I mean, in the home now, is there like, well, don't tell me what to do, I'm a chief too, or what's that been like, in the
Oh,
home? Is
there's
your
some
children?
jokes. There's jokes. There's jokes. I will tell you, I took such great pride in all of the compliments that all of my family paid, for my husband, because he is a high chief in his family. He's also a talking chief in his other side of his family. So he wears a lot of hats, and the thing for me is that his demonstration of his love for me is such an important picture for
Mhm.
other men to see and for other women to be grateful for. And I share that openly because I don't think I would have been able to make it through this ceremony without him. I would not have been. And I think I'm a better person, a better leader, and am wiser around the Fasamoa because he has helped me to speak the language better. He's been raised in it all in Samoa, and he's been able to advise me. So I understand my role, and I want to share that with our Samoan women. Is while I am a high chief in my family now, I also understand my role as an advisor. My husband is a deacon outside of being a high chief, and I've always been told by my mom at the end of the day, I am a wife and a mother and a daughter first. I'm all those things first. Everything else is an extension of that. And that I should always support my husband and know my role. And I believe that that's what strengthens my family is that when I'm reminded that he is the head of my household, that he is the head of my family, and that I will advise to the best of my ability. Oh, believe me, I know how to speak up with him too. But that's the hierarchy of our Fasamoa is understanding that our men our men rely on us women as their advisors. And my
Mhm.
mom has also taught me that you are a great advisor when the man does everything that you want him to do when you see it come to fruition. That means you are a good advisor. And of course, being anchored in God is first and foremost. That lives in our family and in our culture. So I've been very grateful to have a great roommate.
Right. What wise words for you to share, and I'm sure that these words are really what the next generation, even the current generation, needs to be reminded of. Are the values that have been set forth long before we were here in this world by our ancestors. That family, really, the family unit, is something of importance if we're thinking about heritage preservation. Um, I need to ask what is next? I mean, you are now a chief title holder. You have literally you are a household name around the state of California. I mean, what is next for you? Are you planning on running for senator or congresswoman or yeah? What's next for Manufou?
I don't know. I will tell you that I am looking at publishing things that I've written for so long. But I don't want to be Nova from Queen Sugar and publish my journals because we might be an uproar across the ocean. I honestly don't know. I have no idea what's next for me. I mean, for some, as some may know, I had an attempt at running for city council. And it was difficult and challenging. I ran a clean race. I stepped out with, grace. At least I believe I did. But I'm not discouraged to run again. But I also know that, life is short. Life is short, and I see my race and my run as a win for me, because I ran with intention, but I also ran with integrity. I don't believe that everyone, and I'm going to say it, I don't believe that everyone that ran with me did so. There was a lot of mudslinging. People asked me to counter them, and I said no because I want to win on my own merit. When people throw two friends in to run just to unseat you, that spoke
Mhm,
volumes to me. I was
mhm.
like, "Are you that threatened?" Because had those people not run against me, I would have won. So the fact that people felt so threatened to pull people out just to make sure that I didn't win, to me, that's a win. And I hope that anyone that's hoping to run for office does not get discouraged by, a failure at the polls. I don't see it as a failure. I really don't. After the loss, we've received over 2,000 messages globally, locally, of people who said that they were just inspired by the courage of myself and the team. So I don't know. I will knock on your door when I decide what's next. But until then, we have the Polynesian Heritage Awards coming up on May 6th. We invite, everyone and anyone to join us. That is a celebration of us, by us, and it started as me asking my kids to do this for me for my birthday, which is May 2nd. I said, I want to celebrate my people every time it's my birthday. And my kids have been, they've been kind enough to entertain their mom for the past 5 years. So after that, we roll right into May 13th. Atamai Dance Academy is a group that my daughter, Taimalangi Heavenly and Reno, have, created to teach Samoan dance and Samoan language. So they have their recital. And then we open up for Camp Unity, which starts on June 12th and runs through July 21st. And we've been doing that since 2011. And Camp Unity is a free summer Polynesian enrichment camp. Again, for us, by us, and I'm just excited that God has blessed me with the opportunity to do the things that I love.
Wow, incredible. As you are working and making decisions at aerial view, you are still very much at the grassroots, impacting communities, impacting families, and that is definitely something to celebrate and also just highlight as a person, because that is not easy. And I wondered, how do you find rest? I mean, what is your mental wellness?
This is a sign of lack of rest, because all of that is done outside of an 8 to 5 job. So God has been good to me.
Amen. Amen. So I did want to, I have prepared some hot seat topics, which, these are meant to be lighthearted, and we'll just get right into it. And I know we talked about this one this morning, but Shaquille O'Neal getting a Matai title. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that is definitely a hot seat topic, which is probably going to put me in the hot seat, but been there before. Yeah, I see a lot of non-Samoans do a lot of non-Samoan things. We also talked about, getting the markings that I have been graced with on my legs and that my husband has, my daughter has, and my ancestors before me. I feel the same way about that as I do with the titles that belong to our families and my ancestors. They say, "O me sinana, me singanga o ainga," so it's very sacred, and I don't take it lightly. I think my humble I statement, don't come from my family. This is an I statement. I believe those should stay with the family. I appreciate Shaquille and many others, before him, who have honored our Samoan community in many ways through giving, acknowledging, the talents and the contributions of our people. But I also think that those titles need to remain in our families. And that's my 2 cents. That's my 2 cents. So we'll see what people feel about that. I'm not saying that he or anyone before him have bought the titles, but a lot of times, Samoan families feel that this is a way to honor their giving. But I also think there's so many other ways to show our gratitude. It does not have to be a title that belongs to our villages and our families.
That's so good. This next question might get you into a little bit more heat. Your favorite Samoan dish and who makes it?
My favorite Samoan
dish and
Yeah,
who makes it?
My favorite. I have too many. But one of my super favorites is fausi. So that's made with taro, and I rarely find it here. I couldn't find it when I was there. So it's taro. It's like a sweet dessert for me. And then kafolo is the same form of it, but it's made with ulu. And one more, vaisalo. So my family owns Local Delights, plug Local Delights in American Samoa, but vaisalo too is my favorite. These are all things you can eat throughout the day. So those are all like dessert kind of items, but I will say what I ate today, which I really enjoyed, and I brought it back from in a coconut, was fai aipikaki with some kalo and a balsami. So that's what I had today, all from the homeland. So those are all my favorite delicacies.
Oh, nice. And who cooks the best Samoan dishes in your household? It's okay to blast them.
It Yeah, my sister Wendy and my daughter. My daughter Heaven and my sister Buddy Wendy, those are the best chefs in my family, in my household right now. If you're talking about throwdown, some Samoan dishes, some sapsui, faspovi, falifu, that would come from those two. Not me.
Nice. Got you.
I
Okay,
stick to my
remixing.
I know my strengths.
Right, exactly, right. Remixing of old traditional Samoan music. Hate it or love it?
I love the old stuff. I love the old stuff, but my son Reno was fortunate to open up the celebration for one of our greats, a legend in our community, Fanana Jerome Gray, which is brother to Mama D, founder of Anamatangi with Papa Senta. He got to open up for him, and he got to do the original version of Nau Nau Ufi, and he did the newer version, and I love them both, because I think the newer version does it justice. I'm open to the newer versions, but sometimes I just like if you take away a lot of the instruments and I don't get the old sound, then I'm lost. So
Mm,
if I have to pick a first, I will always go with the old school version, the
old school.
original.
And I did not know until I was stalking you today that you are a singer. Are
Mhm.
we planning to get any music from you and a feature collab? No, no.
This person, not from this person. I will say my last collab, which never made it, was with Fiji, and we recorded a song together. And one of the categories for us is Entertainer of the Year, which we have renamed to be the Swamp Cat, renamed for Papali'i Ponte Jessup, who has been just instrumental. That has been instrumental in promoting and really establishing a lot of our Polynesian artists, and he collabed with Fiji a lot. So that never made
Oh.
it. That never made it to the radio. So that was like
But it's somewhere. Does someone have if you're
it's
watching,
somewhere.
you have
It's somewhere. It's somewhere. So no, Reno's a singer in our family. He's taken that on. So not for me. They won't don't see any music in my future.
nice. Well, lastly, I wanted to give you just a minute to shout anyone out. I know you've been doing that throughout the show. If there's anyone else that you would like to shout out before we close this amazing, amazing episode.
Oh, thank you. I do have a very special shout out outside of thanking all of my family, that we were able to share in receiving the title and traveling. When I landed in American Samoa, I did not expect, the welcome that I received. And a group of women who formed literally less than a month ago, the Women's Coalition of American Samoa, organized themselves to put together this event that we had just 2 weeks ago. And so when I got to the college, I wasn't aware that I was a keynote speaker, but these women came together and are promoting strengthening and empowering and uniting together. And that's their platform. And they've embraced that level of solidarity. So when I walked in that room, it was a room filled of women who are really just trying to find their way in leadership. And for them to tell me that they were inspired by me, I was just absolutely overwhelmed. I was given a leadership award there by the members. And to be able to sit there and be in conversation with the First Lady, the Good Lady, and Miss American Samoa, and to see their level of humility in the roles that they carry, I loved that. I loved to see them, lead in that way. So I just want to say thank you to them as we close out Women's History Month. To see women pay me, respect in that way. I left so inspired and reinvigorated and recharged by that welcoming party of women who are really just trying to make a difference in American Samoa and abroad. And so I just want to shout them out. I want to one more shout out in Samoa. My niece Taimalangi Mona Tunganga is spearheading the women's movement there as well. And she has a program called Letene. And so I would just ask for all of us, it's a global effort. She's partnered with Fiji and New Zealand. And I encourage people to get involved with her as well. So I'm very proud of these women as we close out this month who are really making a difference. And the Women of Alliance who are trying to combat domestic violence under the leadership of many. But a shout out to Jennifer Tofaiono, my family, also to Mona Uli, who invited me to be the keynote speaker, who was a Camp Unity mom and my husband's cousin on his Ripley side. These are movers and shakers on the ground in both Samoas. So mad love to them. And we got to have dinner with Papa Senta and Mama D. So all of it has come full circle for me. Full circle. Thank you again for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Papali'i Manufou, for joining us tonight. And I want to extend my gratitude, our executive director, Tiffany, as well as our founders, Mama D and Papa Senta, are just so proud of you. We are also proud of you to be a member of our community, of the Bay Area community, doing great things. And I know we are going to just see more greater, as God has planned for your life. And so we say thank you for making time for us to join us on this podcast and allowing us to open space for you to share your story exclusively. And so we are so forever grateful for you, and we'll always support you in everything that you do. So thank you so much, Manufou, for joining us, and thank you all that have joined us on the live, and then also those that will be joining on the replay. One last thing, Manufou, if they want to get plugged in with you and your work, how can they find you?
You can find me on social media. My personal cell is on my page. It's been on there for 13 years. I'm an open book. I'm easy to find. My phone's never off. So if I can be of service, I'm there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in to our last episode series around Women's History Month and bringing in Papali'i Manufou to help us conclude this amazing month of celebrating women. Again, if you want to get involved, if you want to join the action, volunteer, donate, please do so at www.anamatangi.org. And please stay tuned for our next episode series, which will kick off next week. It'll be a brainstorming session to the public, with my very own, my favorite, my executive director, Tiffany, will be joining us, where you can get at first glance what our brainstorming sessions sound like. Those are very fun, very uncensored, I promise you, and it'll be just a delight. So I want to thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.